Hello. Let this first video serve as an introduction to my channel here. I've noticed that there is no dearth of content available on YouTube for some of my favorite sports. You can find talented, intelligent, hilarious fans of NFL, NBA, whatever other sport you like, but there aren't as many people covering American soccer as I like. Now, that's not to say there's nobody. You've got like Copa 90, and the MLS channel has their own like in-house stuff, and there's guys like Danny T Radio who do really good independent stuff. But I think there's room for at least one more, and you know, here I am. In 2018, Toronto FC put itself in position to win MLS's first Concacaf Championship since LA Galaxy won the Concacaf Champions Cup in 2000. It came down to penalties in the second leg of the CCL Finals against Guadalajara. That's as close as you can come to winning as you can short of actually winning it. Of course, they ended up losing. This continued a poor run of history for MLS teams, which started shortly before the contraction of 2001 and has basically not ceased. MLS teams just don't win the Concacaf Champions League, particularly against Mexican teams. And there's no one reason for this. It's a frustrating sort of mix between complexity and simplicity that doesn't leave anybody satisfied by one answer given. Most simply, at the top end, Mexican teams are just better than MLS teams in terms of talent. But MLS clubs have beaten Mexican clubs and beaten them soundly before. Take Sporting KC's 5-0 defeat of Toluca in 2019 as an example of that. You also got Red Bulls who beat Tijuana, and Toronto beat Club America in 2018, and so that's proof it does happen. It just doesn't happen too often or precisely when it needs to, like in the finals, for instance. There's another common refrain that, for the most part, MLS teams are right in the middle of an off-season during the CCL, dealing with transfers and managerial changes before the games even happen. Often the first match in CCL play is like the first competitive match that a team plays in the calendar year after a few months off. Now granted, Liga MX goes through transfers and managerial changes before CCL as well, but they're already well into their season, about a month in generally, and I think that level of rust that hits MLS teams doesn't hit the Mexican clubs quite as badly. Regardless of history, we will see 5 MLS clubs in the Concacaf Champions League this year, and I want to give a short prediction or something to look out for each CCL team. Let's start with Los Angeles Football Club, Major League Soccer's regular season champion. It should be no surprise that LAFC is the MLS club that I'm going to favor in this tournament. This should be fairly airtight reasoning here. They were the best team during the 2019 MLS regular season, and they really only lost one piece in the offseason, that being veteran midfielder Lee Nguyen, who went to Miami in the expansion draft. If they don't come out really rusty against León, I think they have a great shot at making a deep run in the CCL. I think they have the best player in CONCACAF right now in Carlos Vela. They've got young talent like Diego Rossi and Brian Rodriguez, the likes of which we just generally don't see that often for an MLS squad, or at least we haven't seen before. And I really think if they don't at least reach the CCL final, it's a disappointment for them, especially after floundering in the playoffs last year. The only reason that the pressure on them isn't a lot greater to actually win is the fact that this incarnation of the LAFC team has just never played in CCL before. This is only their 3rd season in existence. And I think that leads me to their one thing that could trip them up. In only 2 years of existence, LAFC has just never gotten it done when it counted, be it in the 2018 playoffs at home against RSL, or the 2019 Open Cup at home against Portland, or in the 2019 playoffs at home against Seattle Sounders. When it comes down to a win or go home scenario, LAFC has a pretty poor record. Granted, they did win their first playoff game last year, but I have to wonder, especially starting against a good Mexican side like León, if they're going to falter under pressure the way that they have throughout their prior 2 seasons. If they play to their potential, LAFC is the best team in CONCACAF and should take home this trophy. But that was the case in MLS last year, and Seattle ended up with the cup in the end. Speaking of home, Seattle has kind of flipped to become the opposite of LAFC, or at least where LAFC stands right now. They've recently become a team with very few postseason problems, a team that just gets it done when they need to, a team with the most trophies won of any MLS team over their past 10 years of existence. Since they joined MLS in 2009, they have 4 Open Cups, 2 MLS Cups, and a Supporters Shield. The one thing left to win, that'd be the Concacaf Champions League. And I think they can do it. This team is veteran-led, they've got winning experience, and they have a pretty favorable opening round draw against City Olympia out of Honduras, a team playing in CONCACAF competition for the first time since 2009. I expect Seattle at least to reach the semis. They're good enough to do so. They've got continuity from last year's Cup champions, and they have probably the easiest path of any American club to get there. However, I want to compare them to the only MLS club that reached the CCL semis last year in my beloved Sporting Kansas City. There we go, it's on the shoulder. Sporting lost their best defender in Ike Opara between the end of 2018 and the beginning of 2019, and that proved problematic for a team that was very strong defensively to begin with. The most major criticism of Seattle in 2019 was the fact that they just were not a stout defensive team, and like KC last year, they also have lost a key defender in the offseason, that being Kim Ki-hee, whose contract ended last year and will not be with the Sounders in 2020. While they might be fine against Olympia and Impact fan mettez-vous mains sur les oreilles, Saprissa, they're on a crash course with Tigres, and I don't see them winning that unless their backline all of a sudden really improves. Speaking of Impact, Montreal is one of 2 MLS clubs who will be starting CCL with a new manager. Montreal is one of 1 MLS clubs who will begin their season on the road in Costa Rica with a new manager who is Thierry Henry. While the Purple Monster have not advanced in the CCL knockout round since 2011, they're coming off of a CONCACAF League win in 2019, and what they may trail behind Montreal in terms of talent level, maybe they definitely make up for with stability. I'm not saying that Thierry Henry can't be a great manager in MLS. I'm just skeptical that he'll be a good enough manager with a good enough squad to defeat a pretty strong Costa Rican team on the road in his first match as a professional manager, and I'm worried they're going to put themselves in too deep of a hole to dig themselves out of in Montreal in the second leg. And speaking of new managers, New York City had a pretty calm offseason transfer-wise, at least regarding player personnel, holding on to Keaton Parks and losing Ben Sweat and Eric Miller in the expansion draft. Now, the big thing that happened to NYCFC was on the managerial end. They do now finally have a manager, a Norwegian named Ronny Deila, who's coming off of a not great tenure with Vålerenga in Norway. That leaves them as a huge question mark coming in. Looking back at last year's competition, Atlanta United notably suffered with that sort of instability on the managerial end, nipping at their heels. They were a good, talented team, as their MLS season showed, but in February of 2019, they weren't ready to win in CCL, still learning and still adapting to the De Boer system. I think New York City absolutely has the talent edge over San Carlos in the first round. I just wonder if they're going to be playing consistently as a team in a way that's going to help them to progress throughout the long tournament. For whatever reason, I think because they've got more veteran leadership as top talent, and they didn't lose their most important player like Atlanta did last year in Almiron, I have a little more faith in NYCFC this year. I think they'll definitely beat San Carlos, and I think they'll at least compete well against Tigres in the second round. However, I think the second round is going to be their stopping point, and they shouldn't be that disappointed by that given the circumstances, unlike Atlanta last year. And speaking of Atlanta United, Atlanta is not going to suffer from the managerial turnover of 2018 and 19, but they have lost 3 of their most important players in Pity Martinez, Darlington Nagbe, and Leandro Gonzalez Pires. And damn, I do not know what to think about Atlanta because of this. This team is the most volatile team that I see in CCL this season. I could absolutely see them coming in emotionally charged up with something to prove after their exit early last season. There's no question that they're going to be checked in for this. But they're running into 2 things. The first thing is that we have never seen an Atlanta United team without LGP. He was their first ever signing. He's been a fantastic player in Atlanta, and it won't be easy to replace them. Nagbe and Martinez were so important to them down the stretch last year as well. I just don't know what they're going to do to replace that level of talent immediately leaving over the course of an offseason. Secondly, they're going to have a bear of a run to make if they're going to get anywhere. They're looking at Club America in the second round potentially, then LAFC potentially in the semis if they get there. If Atlanta takes CCL, they will have absolutely earned it. I think they have the toughest path of anybody. Unlike LAFC, for the most part, Atlanta has won the games that they've needed to in history. After the playoff loss to the Crew in 2017, they went through and won MLS Cup in 2018, the US Open Cup, and then the Campeones Cup in 2019. In critical moments, Atlanta has come through, so I won't be that surprised if they run right through that murderer's row and become the first Concacaf champion from MLS in 20 years. So I guess, Godspeed, MLS teams. Go out, prove everybody wrong. It seems like teams have been coming a lot closer. When Toronto made it in 2018, it didn't feel like the kind of fluke that it did in 2015 when Montreal made it to the final. I think there is reason for optimism for American and Canadian fans. I think our best hopes from MLS are also coincidentally two of the most hated teams in the league, and that's going to be harder for a lot of people to support. For LAFC and Atlanta, and even New York City, they don't have a lot of well-wishers in the league, so that's going to be kind of tough for fans. But really, I think this is the best group of American clubs in CCL. Montreal is not the best Canadian team. That's obviously Toronto FC, but they won the match that counted to get them into CCL, so they deserve to be there given the circumstances. I won't be that surprised if an American team wins it. I would guess that it's Atlanta United, if anybody does. But I could be completely thrown flat on my face as three of their most important players left in the offseason. So, I have no idea what to think, but I'm excited. CCL Fever. Hopefully, it's not going to be only available via Yahoo this year. If it is, I'll suffer through it, and I hope you do as well. Hope this first video was not the worst thing you've ever seen. If it was, please don't tell me. If it was something where you can give me a little bit of nice criticism in the comments, I would always appreciate that. Otherwise, thank you for watching. This is MLS. I'm Joe Bush.